Good evening and welcome, everyone. My name is Dirk. Thank you for joining our live interactive telephone town hall. We're hosting tonight's event to give Congresswoman Spanberger the opportunity to speak directly with you and answer your questions about issues facing Central Virginia. Now, as I mentioned, this event is an interactive forum, and we would love to hear questions from you. We'll be taking as many questions from Virginians as we possibly can live during this event. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your telephone keypad at any time, and you'll be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff. They'll take down your name and where you're calling from. Then the next time you hear your name, you will be live on the call and able to ask your question directly. Now, if you're streaming the event on our website, you can simply type your name and question below the streaming player. Additionally, if you would like to receive updates from our office via email, please press *6 on your phone keypad, and an operator will collect your email address. We could receive a lot of questions during this event, so if we're not able to address your question, please call our district office at 804-401-4110 during normal business hours. Again, if you have any questions throughout this event, please press *3 on your telephone keypad or type your question below the streaming player. And if you'd like to receive updates from us via email, please press *6 on your phone keypad at any time, and an operator will collect your email address. So now it's my pleasure to bring Congresswoman Spanberger onto the call for opening remarks. Congresswoman, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me on tonight's virtual telephone town hall. I hope you all are staying safe and secure in the wake of this storm. I know that it is difficult to get reliable information at times, and there is so much happening and going on. And so I wanted to continue to provide information, answer questions for my constituents, for the people I represent, and listen to directly to those whom I serve. I know that many of you are paying attention to the negotiations continuing on Capitol Hill. Like you, I remain frustrated by the lack of progress and consensus that we have not seen thus far for this next round of COVID-19 related relief. I'm sure we'll get some questions focused on that. But I did want to say that at the point in time we are in the middle of this global pandemic and economic collapse and an unemployment crisis, American people deserve to see action. We have moved forward quickly and efficiently since the beginning of this pandemic to provide immediate relief in this crisis to employees, employers, hospital systems, individuals, and we need to continue to do that. My office receives hundreds of phone calls and requests for assistance related to unemployment and housing and healthcare concerns, and I know this pandemic is personal. It is a time of crisis, and I know how uncertain the future feels for so many people. Please know that if you need assistance, you can always reach out to our office, 804-401-4110. We'll provide that multiple times throughout the length of the call. And please know that in the House, I am continuing to fight to make sure that we are providing the necessary support to our local governments, that we are ensuring the stability of federal telehealth programs, that we are working for those who are unemployed and small businesses that need to be able to reopen their doors once this crisis is under control. I am also advocating for a national COVID-19 testing strategy so that businesses and schools can open in a safe and sustainable way. Now that we see upticks in this virus, we need to implement strategies that allow for greater contact tracing and detection so that we can react based on outbreaks into the future. I know how seriously Virginians are taking this pandemic, and as we move forward, I am committed to making sure that we take responsible steps that protect our vulnerable neighbors, our healthcare workers, and steps that allow our small businesses to reopen without putting workers and customers at risk, steps that are necessary to get our kids back to school and learning in the classroom. And I'm appreciative of you joining me tonight for this discussion, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you very much for being here.
All right, just a quick reminder, if you'd like to get into the queue to ask a question, you can press *3 on your telephone keypad at any time to get into our question queue. Now, if you're streaming online, you can submit your question below the streaming player, And as a final reminder, if you would like to receive updates from us via email, please press *6 on your phone keypad, and an operator will collect your email address. So, Congresswoman, are you ready to take a couple of calls?
Yes, Dirk, thank you.
All right. So first up, we've got Lewis joining us on the line. Lewis, welcome to the call. You are live with Congresswoman Spanberger.
How are you, Congresswoman? Are you there?
I'm here, Lewis. I can hear you.
All right. I want to know, if reelected, what are you going to do about the drug companies and their gouging of the prices? People that are supposed to have been retired like me, I'm still working full time. I haul grain and stuff like that, so people can have food and animals can have food and everything. But the drug prices are killing us.
Thank you for the question, Lewis. So when it comes to drug pricing, Lewis raised, unsurprisingly, one of the top questions that I hear from people across the district. How are we going to bring down the cost of prescription drug prices? And I have worked to introduce legislation that would do just that. I passed a bill in the House of Representatives focused on transparency, which is key to understanding some of the contributing factors for why our drug prices are so expensive. I also introduced a bipartisan bill in the House. It's in committee now, that would focus on getting generic versions of biologic medications. Those are typically more expensive infusion-style medications. Getting the generic version called biosimilars to market as efficiently and as quickly as possible. So those are the two efforts that I have led. In addition to that, in the House of Representatives, we have a bill focused on lowering the cost of prescription drugs. In fact, it's called the Lower Prescription Drugs Costs Now Act. And we passed that bill with bipartisan support in the House of Representatives. And the key provision of this bill is that it allows Medicare to negotiate its prescription drug prices. Now, this is an idea and a focus that has bipartisan support. In fact, when running for election in 2016, the president talked frequently about his desire to see Medicare be able to negotiate its prescription drugs. We see that within Medicare, there is no ability to leverage the market to get a competitive price for prescription drugs. And that really blocks out the ability to bring down the costs of prescription drugs through competition. And that impact, as it relates to Medicare, of course, is on our seniors and our retirees. But our bill, the Lower Prescription Drug Costs Now Act, allows for private insurers to then benefit from those negotiated rates as well. So leveraging competition to bring down the cost of prescription drug prices to really meet where the market is. Currently, without the ability to compete, without the ability to negotiate, Medicare and Americans across the country are paying prices that are just astronomically high as it relates or as it compares to what we're seeing in other nations. One notable thing that I do think is important is that it is important for us to recognize that as we are looking at coming out of the economic crisis that is COVID-19, and as we're looking at the long-term health impacts that many Americans will be facing, the fact that for basic medication, basic life-saving medications, our neighbors are paying so much more than they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, for things like insulin, basic heart medication, it is putting such a strain on the pocketbooks of Americans throughout our country and our district. So that's why I led on these pieces of legislation. That's why I voted and supported on the Lower Prescription Drug Costs Now Act. I'm hoping that it might be able to move forward within the Senate. Again, the basic provision of it is something that indeed the president also supported on the campaign trail. So I'm looking forward to progress on that because it will impact in a meaningful way the lives of Americans who require and need prescription drug medication on a regular basis.
So next, we're joined by Brenda. Brenda's joining us live. Brenda, welcome to the call. What's your question for Representative Spanberger?
Well, my question is revolving around unemployment. I applied for unemployment and I was accepted, or I had qualified for the program. I received a payment in May, and then payment stopped. I tried to communicate with the offices, and no return calls, no pick up. No person would pick up the phone, and it's like a perpetual circle. They have you calling this number, then that number. I have not received any correspondence in the mail as to why I haven't received any further payments. I don't know where I stand now. The fortunate thing is I have secured a job since that time that I'd start like next week, but in the interim from May until now, which is August, I haven't received anything. Not a letter, not a dollar, nothing.
Well, Brenda, first and foremost, congratulations on the new position. Congratulations on the new job. But as it relates to the challenge that you're facing about not having received the unemployment that you were eligible for, or starting to receive payments and then having them end, this is a state issue, but we are hearing from constituents across our 10 counties about the challenges related to unemployment benefits with the state of Virginia. Unfortunately, part of the challenge is there are so many individuals who are drawing upon unemployment benefits for the first time because of the COVID-19 crisis. And while Virginia has taken the steps of hiring additional individuals to help that process through, there are backlogs. Brenda, I welcome you to reach out to our office, give a call to our office, 804-401-4110. Even though this is a state issue and the backlog does exist at the state level, certainly we can be in touch and see if we can check up on the status along with you and be a partner in making sure that you do receive the unemployment benefits for which you are eligible. But again, congratulations on the new position. And my office is watching the town hall, so they'll know to expect your call, Brenda. Thank you.
Our next caller is Catherine. Catherine, welcome to the call. What is your question?
Hi, thank you. And I want to say you really take it on by having these town halls, and I know you do them quite often, so thank you for this opportunity. My question is, what are your views? Have they changed any? Are they staying focused? What's on gun control? We live in the country, and I'm against automatic weapons or high magazines capacity. I'm not for that, but for letting us keep a revolver or a shotgun. What's your views?
Absolutely. Catherine, thank you for asking this question. It is absolutely your constitutional right to keep a revolver. As you mentioned, the example that you gave, I support the Second Amendment. I grew up in a household with firearms. I'm a former law enforcement officer. I used to carry a gun every day. I am well versed in what it is to be a responsible gun owner. Where I stand on issues of gun violence prevention is this, first and foremost, as it relates to background checks. Catherine, if you are going to go buy a new pistol or a firearm and you went into a place like Cabela's, you'd go in, you'd fill out the form, it would come back pretty quickly, and you'd walk out of the store with your purchase. That's the background check process. But the background check process exists because there are some individuals in our society, in our community, who are deemed to be ineligible to purchase firearms because of a history of violent felonies, because of a history of domestic abuse. They're called prohibited buyers. And when you make a purchase from a federally licensed point of sale, one of the gun vendors I just mentioned, they have to go through the background check process. The challenge is that state to state or location to location, if it is not a federally licensed point of sale, so we frequently hear about the gun show loophole, that's what that is, where if it's not a federally licensed point of sale, online sales, gun show sales, they don't have to do the background check, which means that someone who may not be allowed to purchase a firearm because of a prohibited buyer status would be able to do so. So I support background checks on all firearms purchase, regardless of the point of sale. So that's basically applying the same standard across all firearms purchases. And we did have a bill in the House of Representatives that passed with bipartisan support that would do just that. There's another bill that I supported and voted for in the House of Representatives that would close the Charleston Loophole. So the Charleston Loophole, as it relates to violence prevention, is that currently, under current law, if someone goes through the background check process and it takes too long, the default is for them to be able to purchase that firearm. And I think the default is correct, but the window is too short. And so in the case of the Charleston shooter, the man who walked into a church and shot the churchgoers in the middle of Bible study, he was actually a prohibited buyer because of his history. He should not have legally been able to purchase a firearm, but because of changes of address and the system being a bit complicated, after a couple days when there was no return, it allowed for it to default to a yes, he bought that firearm. The real challenge, in addition to some of the tragic outcomes, is that when someone comes back having purchased a firearm, even though they are a prohibited buyer, it's now on an ATF agent. So a federal agent now has to go back and collect back that firearm, putting that law enforcement officer in a potentially very dangerous position of going and arriving at a home and saying, we know you've purchased a firearm and indeed you're not allowed to have it. And so extending that window for that presumptive processing to just at the 10-day mark, I think is a reasonable way to ensure that we are not seeing tragedies like we saw in Charleston. That's another bill that came before the House of Representatives, and that's another bill that passed the House of Representatives. And my focus as it relates to gun violence prevention is taking real clear steps to ensure that responsible gun owners can purchase and maintain their firearms, but that those who are prohibited buyers are not able to obtain firearms through purchases at non-federally licensed points of sale. In addition to that, I also support greater funding to the NICS program to ensure faster, more efficient processing of those background checks. I do support, which is now legal, study of gun violence prevention, because I do think that we should be making data-informed policy. And so those are other things that I support as it relates to responsible gun ownership and keeping our communities safe. So thank you so much for your question, Catherine, and I appreciate you joining this town hall.
And next on the line, we've got Mary joining us. Mary, welcome to the call. What is your question for Congresswoman Spanberger?
Well, Congresswoman, I appreciate you listening to your constituents. It's not always true, so we appreciate that. My question is about the post office, that Donald Trump seems to want to destroy the post office because it allows vote by mail, which he would like to not happen for his reelection. In Congress is mandated in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, it says that Congress is mandated to establish post offices, and I'm assuming that means not to let them be destroyed by a president who is out for his own benefit. He has already assigned someone as the new Postmaster General, and that person is not qualified, and his main job to be there is to destroy the post office, and he is already doing that. I have a neighbor that had an envelope package coming from Richmond. It took 8 days to come from Richmond. It was stuck in Richmond and to get to Troy for 8 days. So they are not allowing the sorting machines to be used. They must sort by hand, and so that takes so much longer. And he disallows overtime. So his main job is to destroy the post office, and it looks like it's working. My question is, how can Congress stop this from happening? I don't understand how he would have the capability to destroy the post office. And can Congress please stop him from doing it? Thank you very much.
Mary, thank you very much. Mary's a wealth of information on this topic, and Mary, I appreciate all of what you said, including the facts where you noted that the creation of the post office is actually constitutionally mandated, where in the Constitution, in Article 1, it does talk about the fact that Congress's responsibility is the creation of post offices and postal roads. So at the very inception of our country, we recognized the need to be connected via postal roads with post offices to allow for commerce, to allow for regular communications. And the post office and postal service has been vital to the development of the United States and our economy, quite frankly. Mary called out a couple things, in particular, some limitations that have been placed on the post office recently. There's been limitations on the ability to pay overtime. There's been limitations on the ability and time frames during which Some of the sorting machines can be used at some of the processing and distribution plants. This is creating a backlog of mail that will continue as we are anticipating increased utilization of vote by mail. This is a real problem, the fact that we are seeing a slowing of postal delivery services, intentionally so, by shutting down or limiting the use of sorting machines and limiting the use of overtime dollars. So I'll talk about, Mary's point was related to kind of what that means potentially for the election. Notably, we are anticipating an uptick in election participation by mail for military members who've served overseas, for others who have worked overseas, as I did. I voted by mail when I was serving at a U.S. embassy abroad. It's a vital, important way for Americans living or working or at school elsewhere from where they're registered to vote to be able to participate. And it has been well utilized, including by many members of the U.S. government who are in D.C. for work. It's been a really strong way to vote. But notably, for us Virginians, it's important to remember that you might want to give your mail a little bit more time this time. But in advance of November, as we're anticipating an increased flow of mail. But to get at the heart of Mary's questions, I do agree that the steps that the new Postmaster General is taking are detrimental, and I oppose them. And in terms of what Congress can do, there's efforts within the oversight within Congress to conduct congressional oversight to see whether or not these steps are taken in a way meant to potentially harm the Postal Service and undermine its production and efforts. Now, notably, some people will say, oh, well, there's been efforts to try and privatize the Postal Service. I wholeheartedly oppose efforts to privatize the Postal Service. As someone who represents many rural counties, 10 counties in total, many of them rural, there is not the same business priority to get out in a timely fashion to rural communities and communities that are even far more rural than the ones that I represent here in Central Virginia. Notably, it is oftentimes the U.S. Postal Service that does last mile delivery for some of the private sector private companies that are doing large-scale delivery. And so the Postal Service is important and foundational to our country. Again, as Mary mentioned, it's in the Constitution. And one of the major things that Congress must do is recognize that, in fact, it was Congress a little over a decade ago that created some of the financial uncertainty that the Postal Service is facing. Notably, Congress passed a law that requires the Postal Service to pre-fund its retirement 75 years out into the future. This is a requirement that we would never put upon or expect a business or a private sector company to ever endure. Funding into the future retirement. So it is through these actions that we've actually created, Congress, long before I got there, created real challenges from a cash flow perspective for the U.S. Postal Service. So I support changing and removing that requirement. I also support recognizing the value of the U.S. Postal Service and what it can do in communities. Notably, there are many localities where the U.S. Postal Service, there's already a post office. There's literally a post office in every zip code, allowing them to do basic banking and basic check cashing would create a new revenue stream and provide a great service, particularly to some of our communities that are underbanked and under-resourced, particularly in urban areas or in very rural communities. These are two steps that Congress can take. There's bills focused on these efforts, and I support them both, that would allow the Postal Service to function more competitively without being hindered by prior laws put in place more than a decade ago, to allow the Postal Service to be competitive, allow the Postal Service to be a bit more agile. And I wholeheartedly oppose some of the efforts that have been undertaken to slow or hinder the Postal Service's ability to deliver mail. So I thank Mary for her attention to this and to bringing this topic to our conversation today.
Next up on the line, we've got Tracy joining us. Tracy, welcome to the call. You're live with Congresswoman Spanberger. What is your question?
Good evening, Congresswoman. I know you're aware of the challenges with broadband for some of us in rural areas. I live in central Richland County. We've been voicing our concern for years regarding broadband access. I understand you have proposed legislation regarding 5G broadband. I'm not sure where that proposal is right now. Considering we're in the middle of an epidemic and families are facing the choice of whether to send their child to school to potentially get exposed to COVID or have them learn remotely without adequate internet connection, what is being done to expedite affordable broadband for all families, especially during this period of time when some of us are trying to work from home and kids need to be educated remotely?
Tracy, thank you for this question. This is one of my favorite topics in the House of Representatives to talk about broadband internet. And notably, since March, as this pandemic spread, as people transitioned to working from home, if that is possible, and as students started coming back home, it has become an increasingly relevant topic for people across the country. And so while I've been talking about broadband internet since the day I arrived in Congress, and last year fought to protect, first to raise and then to protect funding for the Reconnect Program. So the Reconnect Program is a USDA program that provides grant funding to localities that want to bring internet to their community. It requires engagement from the community, a plan for implementation, and a grant application to demonstrate how that money will be spent. Within our district and within Central Virginia, just in February, Central Virginia was awarded a USDA Reconnect grant of more than $20 million. And that impacts a couple of the counties that I represent, notably where the local electric co-op was able to put together a great plan and bring those grant dollars to Central Virginia. But that is not enough. As we are in this pandemic, it's become very clear that we need coast-to-coast internet. Within the scope of the pandemic, in addition to Reconnect programming, the funding that we protected last year, the funding that has been delivered, as an example, to Central Virginia back in February, it was granted. Just last week, the House of Representatives, we passed a bill that had a 78% increase in Reconnect funding because, again, nationwide, people are seeing the impact of having kids not have reliable internet access, teachers not have reliable internet access. Typically, families adjust. Small business owners do their email at a McDonald's after hours to catch up on things, or students do their homework in the library. During a pandemic, when things are shut down, that is not possible. Another element to react to the pandemic is the E-rate program, which allows for dollars to be spent on Wi-Fi hotspots for communities to help residents and schools and public buildings become hotspots for students and for the community. The challenge here, of course, is that even with a focus on this is a solution that impacts people if they do have the ability to utilize that hotspot. So if you don't have cell service, for many people, that program is less helpful, or a portion of that program is less helpful. And those are really Band-Aids in a larger need. So there's one last bill or endeavor that I would point to, which is the Accessible, Affordable Internet for All Act, which I helped introduce in the House of Representatives, that would mark a monumental investment, and I say that specifically, an investment in broadband internet connectivity from coast to coast. That this bill sees that broadband internet is just as vital to the development of our communities and our economy as electricity was 100 years ago, and makes a real investment in bringing it coast to coast. That bill did just pass the House of Representatives as part of a larger infrastructure bill. I do not anticipate that bill will go through the Senate in its exact form, but I will continue advocating for, when the Senate takes a vote, that they do take a vote on our broadband bill. It is an economic priority. It is a healthcare priority. It is an educational priority, and it is one that I will continue working on. So I appreciate this question. Again, it's Reconnect and E-rate are the two programs that are delivering the immediacy of aid during the pandemic. And it's going to take a long-term investment and solution to bring jobs and connectivity across the country, and in particular to Central Virginia.
So we're joined now by Lee. Lee, welcome to the call. What is your question?
Yes, Mrs. Spanberger, I'm sorry, Honorable Spanberger, I'm not quite sure, but
You can call me Abigail. Thank you, Lee.
Abigail, you voted for the program that's coming up for the House bill that just went through for the $3 trillion care thing that's going through. And my question is why would everyone vote for passing a bill that has so much help for other states, and why should Virginians help pay for so many states that and have to pay for the taxes that are going to be raised and have to be raised to help pay for so many cities that were irresponsible for so many years and not paying their bills, and we should have to pay that as Virginia taxpayers. I would like to know why you feel that we should have to pay that. That should really not be part of this package as a CARES package. So many people are hurting, and that should not be part of that package.
Thank you for your question, Lee. So we have so many different names for different bills. So I did want to mention the House of Representatives passed a $3 trillion bill called the HEROES Act. Prior to that, there was another bill called the CARES Act. The HEROES Act, I believe, is the bill that you were referencing. And in fact, I actually voted against the HEROES Act. I voted against the HEROES Act for a variety of reasons. One, at the time in May, I could see the 31st of July deadline coming up when many Americans and many Virginians would be losing their unemployment benefits. The HEROES Act that was put forth, while I agree with many of the provisions within it, it had many other provisions that were unrelated to the immediacy of the COVID-19 crisis. And I did not think that it was the most effective use of Congress's time during a global pandemic to be pushing for things not related to addressing the immediacy of the crisis. So as it relates to that particular bill, I did vote against it. Now, as it relates to local and state relief, there was funding in the CARES Act that provided funding to states. Localities larger than 500,000 people got support directly to them, where other communities get that support funneled through the states. And that support is for education. It is for helping our schools. And I have heard directly from administrators within among the 10 counties telling me about how they've utilized the funding that came through the CARES Act and how that is helping their schools on the ground. Now, related to additional support to state and local, I do support additional support to state and local. And I use our community as a good example of this. I represent 10 counties that are fiscally responsible, that plan for a rainy day, that balance their budget, that adapt to hardship. But they could not have planned for a global pandemic where we would have completely shut down everything. And our counties are employers. They are employers to police officers, employers to teachers, in many cases, other first responders, in many cases, water systems and basic utilities. And so ensuring that our localities have the ability to support themselves based on lost revenue during this time, just as we've provided support to other employers and small businesses through the PPP program, I do support providing support and relief to local communities. I do not support them being able to utilize those funds to pay off other debts or large infrastructure projects. But if it's related to loss of revenue, if it's related to the relief that they need, buying PPP for police officers who are showing up on the scenes of police calls, ensuring that they have additional resources within county jails, ensuring that schools can make the investments in potentially upgraded HVAC systems or PPE, personal protective equipment. These are all things that I support, and this is an area of bipartisan support. In fact, I led an effort of more than 100 members of Congress talking about how we needed this tactical support for our local communities. And I have heard directly from Board of Supervisor members across communities saying that this support is very helpful and very necessary. And these are some of the best, I'll say this, some of the best run, most fiscally responsible communities, certainly in the Commonwealth, I'll say, and probably across the country. but limiting that to be those funds to be able to react to the crisis is an important component of using those funds responsibly, and I think a necessary one.
So as a reminder for everyone on this call, if you would like to receive updates from Congresswoman Spanberger's office via email, please press *6 on your phone keypad right now, and an operator will collect your email address so you can be kept in the loop from the Congresswoman's office. Now, we've got a couple of questions from online, and one of them is Charlene, who writes in, is the government doing anything about mental health during and after the epidemic?
Thank you, Charlene. The question was about mental health during and after the pandemic. So this is something that I have heard about on the ground as a major crisis, particularly within the law enforcement community, the number of calls that they are getting for individuals who are in a point of crisis. Calls to respond to a mental health crisis are significant, particularly in our more rural counties. That is what local law enforcement have reported to me. And that puts a major stress on their resources, on their officers, and certainly on the community and in the lives of those individuals and their families. Another area of concern relates to overdose. So in this time of significant stress, those who are suffering from substance use disorders, we're seeing increases in overdoses and real challenges related to one's substance use disorder. Some of that is during the isolation of the shutdown. Those who are in programs have not been able to access them in the same way. So I've spoken with a number of the addiction and recovery entities and nonprofits that work throughout the district to discuss how they've been able to deliver services. And it just hasn't been the same. Everyone's doing their best, but it has really been hard for those who struggle with substance use disorder or with mental illness. And so what Congress is doing is we've recognized this link, certainly during this time of isolation, during the shutdowns, during the time of increased stress related to unemployment and fear of a global pandemic. We have provided additional funding directly and specifically for contending with substance use disorders, dealing with addiction, and separately as it relates to larger kind of broad scale mental health challenges, recognizing that this is a real challenge. And so I think another thing that we've done to address it here is as it relates to telehealth benefits, allowing individuals to, in broadening the scope of telehealth accessibility. This gets back to the broadband internet, because if you can't get on the internet, you can't utilize these services. But for those who do require and benefit from mental health services, ensuring that those are broadly available through telehealth is an incredibly important step and one that Congress has taken.
All right, going back to the telephone line, we've got Hunter on the line with us now. Hunter, welcome to the call. What is your question?
Yes, ma'am. My family's in the logging business, and recently the American Logger Council has proposed a bill for a logger relief package, and local state organizations like the VLA have supported the bill. So far, since COVID, our business and other friends that are in the same business, we're down 50%, and I just wanted to get an idea if you supported this bill, if you've heard about it. I've called your office, and they said that you have heard about it and you were supporting it. I just wanted to kind of get your take on it.
Hunter, thank you so much for this question. Yes, I am aware of this bill. I have had lots of good conversations. My team has had lots of good conversations with VLA and particularly with Ronnie. And actually, I'm going to be meeting with VLA in about a week and a half, I think, if I've got my time frame right. And I am supportive of that particular bill that you mentioned, sir. And so I do know what a difficult time this is for those in the logging industry. And I really appreciate all of the advocacy that you're demonstrating in this call. I am a co-sponsor of that bill, and trust me, the VLA is working hard on behalf of Virginia's logging industry, and I'm grateful for you participating in the call tonight. So thank you, Hunter.
Next up, we're joined by Amber. Amber, welcome to the call. What is your question for Congresswoman Spanberger?
Yes, hi. My question is regarding school and the children. And in Culpeper County, it has been a blended schedule. So kids will go 2 days and then 3 days off. So my question is, what are we doing for the parents that they can't afford to stay home? You know, definitely with the pandemic, they can't afford daycare, they can't afford a babysitter, or they don't have relatives. And what are we doing to help those families with the kids being out of school and not having those resources? And as well as, like, school for a lot of children is food, it's their mental health, it's their exercise, it's their education, it's socialism, you know, it's socializing. And so for me, I'm wondering, what type of help are we giving to those families in that time of need? And regarding as well, you mentioned more testing, which I think is great, especially for schools. What does that look like as well? Will we be testing for antibodies or for just a positive result?
So, Amber, thank you for your question. I'm going to address the testing question first, and then I'll talk a little bit about the questions related to schools. So, as it relates to testing, because we don't yet know how much a prior exposure, so the presence of antibodies, might provide protection against contracting COVID-19 or even being able to transmit it. The priority of public health officials and my priority is the testing of those with the active disease. It's valuable to know if you have antibodies, but if we're trying to tactically ensure that we are stopping the spread of this virus, that needs to be with quick testing for those who might have an active case of this virus. And so we have previously, we being Congress, House, Senate, Democrats, and Republicans, have passed into law, and the president has signed for billions of dollars of investment as it relates specifically to testing and contact tracing, so that as we open up our communities and our schools eventually, we can react really aggressively and efficiently to do tactical closures if necessary from a public health perspective. The unfortunate part is across Virginia and across the country, we do not have testing at the speed which we need it to be at. There are private providers that take upwards of 7 to 10 days to get results. If you are waiting 7 to 10 days to get results, by that point in time, if you haven't fully isolated for the period, you've now spent 7 to 10 days infecting people. And having spoken with contact tracers in Virginia, that's one of the biggest challenges they're facing, is that if it takes too long to get results, we are now expanding the potential infection across the community. So as it relates specifically to schools and businesses, the key is getting testing quickly. And in fact, we passed a bill, the Paycheck Protection Program and Health Care Enhancement Act, that required of the administration a national testing strategy. Unfortunately, I was very displeased with the response from the administration. The response has basically been that states are on their own. The states should be on their own to conduct the testing. The reason that I find that to be unsatisfactory is because there is travel among states. It really impacts all of us if another state is not conducting testing at the rates that it should. The larger issue of why that's a problem, though, is it becomes a supply chain issue. As we saw in March and April and into the spring and summer, we have states competing with other states for supplies, for personal protective equipment, for ventilators, for reagents, which are necessary for the test, for nasal pharyngeal swabs, which are necessary for the test, and having a coordinated effort where the national government, the administration, can leverage our supply chain and make sure that we are producing and pushing enough of what we need across the country is incredibly important. Because so much of the components, nasal pharyngeal swabs and reagents, and some elements of PPP are items that we rely on from other countries. I am a co-sponsor of efforts within the House to create resiliency in our own domestic supply chain. Some of what we saw in slowdowns in testing in the spring was because nasal pharyngeal swabs that we use for testing are produced in Italy, and Italy was on a major shutdown. So supply chain issues create real challenges that impact all of us. So that's why testing is so important, particularly as it relates to schools, because we need to have quick testing, we need a national strategy, we need contact tracing in place, and we need to be able to move tactically to protect public health. As it relates specifically to schools, and childcare issues, within prior legislation that the House of Representatives passed for Virginia alone, we had $70 million in block grant funding that would go to childcare providers. This is already passed, already signed into law. The $70 million is the portion that Virginia gets to support families who need assistance and to support daycare providers so that they can stay in business. Additionally, with support to elementary and secondary education, Virginia's received $238 million through the CARES Act funding. Those dollars are incredibly important for allowing our school systems to be able to transition to either fully virtual or hybrid or in-person classes, depending upon what's safest. And you mentioned the hybrid model. Many of the communities that I represent are moving towards a hybrid model in part because of lack of internet connectivity. Across the United States, there are about 12 million children and students who don't have access to broadband internet. And so for them, a fully virtual model isn't possible. And so, our school systems are being as responsive as they possibly can, trying to adapt on the ground. I've spoken with superintendents and school board members, and the decisions that they are making are not easy, but there are decisions that they're making in the interest of the students' learning experience and in the public health realm. And one other point that I would note as it relates to childcare is just last week in the House of Representatives, we passed two bills, one aimed at helping child care providers to ensure that they stay in business and stay afloat, and another aimed at helping families be able to pay for and have their children in childcare so that they can continue working and that they can put their children in a safe childcare environment. Those two bills passed the House with bipartisan support. And I look forward to seeing them move forward in the Senate. And I think I've taken too long answering that question, but I do appreciate it, and I thank you for it. So, Dirk, back to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. Our next caller is Tiffany. Tiffany, welcome to the call. You are live. What is your question?
Hi, my question is, I'm actually pretty fortunate, and I'm a government contractor, so I make decent money, but literally half of my paycheck goes to health insurance. And I couldn't imagine somebody in a worse position than me and how that would affect their ability to pay for their home and their car and everything like that. And I just wonder if there's anything going on. I'm sorry about the baby, but if there's anything that in the works for that.
So thank you for this question, Tiffany. The overall cost of healthcare, we heard at the very beginning, the first question was about the cost of prescription drugs. Usually at these events, and when we did them in person before the pandemic, usually the first question is prescription drugs or healthcare writ large. So I thank you for this question. I am a supporter of the Medicare X Choice Plan, which would create a public option plan for those who choose to buy a program. It's modeled off of the Medicare program. It would provide one additional option for those who wish to purchase insurance or don't have insurance offered to them through an employer. It creates more competition in the marketplace, and it leverages the power of Medicare's strength. Medicare currently exists in every zip code across the country, and to build a plan off that for those who choose to use it would be a way to strengthen healthcare options. Notably, the current attacks that continue on our healthcare system, the taking away of the individual mandate, as was done with the 2017 tax bill. These are ways that we have seen the administration continue to harm our current healthcare system. There's currently cases before the courts where the administration is actually attempting to undo all of the provisions of the ACA that would include lifetime caps for payments. This particularly impacts those who have suffered from significant illness, significant hospitalization. It significantly impacts premature babies who ran up a lot of what would be a lifetime cap early on in their lives. It would undo protections that exist for those with pre-existing conditions. It would undo the ability to keep adult children on their parents' insurance until they're 26. So at a time when we are in a global pandemic, it is astounding to me that there continues to be assaults on our current healthcare system as it is, fault and all, as you mentioned, Tiffany, given the cost of healthcare. Certainly having more people become uninsured, more people showing up at a hospital without insurance, requiring life stabilizing care, but without the way to pay for it, that will only drive up costs for everyone else. That's why I support strengthening our current healthcare system. That's why I am a co-sponsor of the Medicare X Choice Act. And that's why I will continue to protect our current healthcare system. And notably at the state level, Medicaid expansion, which was expanded back in 2018. Currently, there are about 50,000 folks in Virginia's 7th District who have access to health care during a global pandemic because of that vote. And so, again, if we were to upend the current healthcare system from the federal perspective, those advancements at the state level with Medicaid expansion would also be undone. So what I'm doing is protecting what we've got and trying to move forward with prescription drug pricing, the prescription drug pricing bill that I mentioned earlier, and then the Medicare X Choice Act.
All right, next we've got Lois on the line. Lois, welcome to the call. You're live with Representative Spanberger. What's your question?
Good evening.
Good evening,
Lois.
Lois.
This is my first time, and this may not be the time or the place because my questions are smaller and more personal. First of all, my husband and I went to dinner the other night. We've been staying home and doing everything we're supposed to do, but we have started going out a little bit. And the Mexican restaurant we went into, none of the staff was wearing masks. And I thought that was mandate that staff and anyone going out in public needed to wear a mask. So I was very uncomfortable, and I didn't really know what to do about that. My other question was, my 9-year-old granddaughter has been visiting her grandmother in South Carolina all summer. She's coming back tomorrow, and I wasn't sure with her age. They said that they had been following the rules, and she's only been with family and 2 little friends on the street. But I didn't know if I needed to take precautions when she came back.
Well, Lois, thank you for these questions. While your questions are specific to your own personal experiences, I'm sure they're very similar to the experiences of others and potentially relevant. So thank you for asking them. I have spent a lot of time speaking with constituents who are worried about how do we re-enter the economy? And specifically, I've spent a lot of time talking to restaurant owners because restaurants have suffered significantly during closures and during this healthcare and economic crisis. So there are pretty strong guidelines out there for how restaurants should open safely and the precautions that they should take, such as capacity within their restaurant space if it's inside, patio space if it's outside. But there are provisions depending upon, to my knowledge, depending upon where someone's working. If they are working in the hot kitchen, that there may be some different exemptions for mask wearing. So I would recommend that if you have significant concerns, that there are a variety of different options, and we've put out actually some of the guidance that has been available and made available to local restaurants to help people understand what is the reopening process. Because, Lois, what you mentioned is if a customer doesn't feel comfortable going back out to a restaurant, that will slow the progress that the larger economy makes, and that also will hurt the restaurant business. So ensuring that customers feel comfortable going back is incredibly important. And I think if you have any concerns about specific restaurants, to reach out to that management or choose restaurants based on the ones where you feel most comfortable. But I do know that the restaurateurs and the restaurant owners that I have spoken with are taking strong steps forward to make sure that not only are their workers safe, which is their responsibility, of course. Not only are their customers safe, which is also, a responsibility, but that everyone feels comfortable, which is a lot harder to measure. And so, Lois, I thank you for raising this question, and certainly I do hope that you will feel comfortable and that the restaurant you mentioned is making all the right choices to keep people safe. Now, as it relates to the example you gave with your granddaughter, I think the recommendation, and again, I'm not a physician, but I do spend a lot of time reading the recommendations. If you have concerns about whether or not your granddaughter might have been impacted, there's always the availability of testing, though notably, as I said earlier, some of them are very slow to return. Doing 14 days potentially away from your granddaughter, as heartbreaking as that might be, could be a good option. But mask wearing, I know it's a little bit less personal. If you're with your granddaughter, I'm sure you want to give her a nice hug. But mask wearing and visiting outside, especially during that period of time when she's returning back to Virginia and going through what is typically the 14-day period of time when if someone were to get COVID-19, that's the typical incubation period when someone should be isolated. So if you're at all concerned, distance, outside visits, and mask wearing is probably the best recommendation that I could make. Again, not as a physician, but based on all the recommendations that I have been hearing from public health officials. And I hope that gives you a bit of a peace of mind so you can see your granddaughter now that she's coming back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And looking at the clock, it looks like we have time for only one more question during this telephone town hall. And so our final question is coming from Jim. Jim, welcome to the call. What is your question?
Representative Spanberger, I know you only have one vote, but what do you see the roadblocks to getting the next stimulus package passed quickly?
Jim, I may have one vote, but I'm going to need a couple minutes to answer this question. The roadblocks to getting the next stimulus package move forward, I think there are a few. And one of the biggest challenges is that because of the pandemic, because of some of the safety and security aspects of putting a couple hundred people in a room, the negotiations here have really been limited. Some of that is preference of the administration as well. So the negotiations are really, at this point, it's about 6 people who are primarily leading those negotiations. I believe that if we can focus on a couple basic foundational pieces, support to individuals, right? So whether or not that's through unemployment, continued unemployment benefits, which I do support, whether or not that is through with a priority on avoiding evictions and foreclosures, which we should do because we are really in danger of a housing crisis moving forward if we start to see massive levels of foreclosure and eviction. Support to state and local. This is an area of significant bipartisan support with, as one of the earlier questioners asked, with qualifications that money should be used for COVID-related relief. That seems to be a place where most people can agree. And notably testing. And so I think these are the primary tenets of what we should see. Testing, support to individuals so that they can put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads, support to employers, particularly small businesses that are so foundational to our economy and the process of keeping food on the table for their employees. And then beyond that, that's the centerpiece that I think everybody can agree on. Sometimes the solution to what is the next step forward, there's a bit of a debate, which is exactly where we should be. But I hope that your question was actually, what are the stumbling blocks? And I think that part of it is on both sides of the aisle, there's been an effort and an endeavor and an attempt to bring things to the table that don't have anything related to COVID-19. We've seen it on one side of the aisle, it's support to the Kennedy Center. On the other side of the aisle, it's tax exemptions for expensive client lunches called the 2 martini rule, right? there are efforts on both sides of the aisle to kind of distract from the immediacy of the crisis. And those are the stumbling blocks when people try and bring more to the table than contending with where we are now and the real economic need. We have seen a drop in GDP unlike anything we witnessed in the Depression or the Great Recession. It is significant, right? Like, these are worrying economic signs. We have tremendous unemployment across this country. We are moving in the path towards a housing crisis if we don't take action. And the long-term impact of not kind of nipping some of those in the bud, not trying to make investments in our community, are really significant for where our country will be, financially speaking, in 5, 10, 15 years from now. So the stumbling blocks, I think, are the fact that people on both sides of the aisle across the board need to focus on dealing with the crisis of where we are and focusing on addressing it and avoiding the additional crises of a housing crisis, prolonged unemployment, and an additional drop in GDP. I think at times politics plays a significant role in it. It shouldn't. We have notably come to the table with 4 bipartisan, bicameral bills that we move forward on very, very quickly. And so, we've demonstrated that we can do it, the House and the Senate together, Democrats and Republicans together, providing the immediacy of support and investments in our economy and in our people. And that's what we need to do again. And so, unfortunately, we have passed the July 31st date. So there are already folks who have rolled off unemployment. There's already significant insecurity in the lives of many, many Americans. But my hope is that we can move forward very, very quickly. And so I would just say one more thing for everyone out there. It's important that we come up with a bipartisan, bicameral solution. We cannot spend much more time kind of bickering over all of the things that one side of the aisle wants, all of the things that one side of the aisle want. We have to focus on what are the real large problems facing the American people, American businesses, and American economy, and we have to deal with them directly. This is an investment in our future by staving off greater crisis at this point in time. So I hope that we will come to an agreement quickly. I know there is a lot of work being done on this. Of course, it's not as fast as any of us would want. I would have loved to have seen a deal 3 weeks ago, well in advance of the July 31st date. And so I will express and share any disappointment with those who are here today. But moving forward, those are my priorities. And I think anything else needs to be tabled. Other priorities that we all share, that some share, those things should be addressed. If it's not the immediacy of the crisis, they should be addressed separately. And people will need to work hard to build coalitions around whatever those priorities are. But the real stumbling blocks, the fact that people are bringing more than we should to the table when we're trying to contend with this crisis. So.
Congresswoman, thank you for spending so much time with us and answering so many questions today. Do you have any parting thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Thank you, Dirk. I do have parting thoughts. I want to say thank you to everyone I represent for joining us today for this telephone town hall. Those who are joining online, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for the broad array of questions that we heard tonight. I hope that if your question wasn't answered, please be in touch with our office or please follow up at the end of this call. If there's questions or concerns that you might have, please be in touch with our office. My website is spanberger.house.gov. And notably, for those who are continuing to face COVID-related crises and problems and challenges, we have a whole tab full of resources related to COVID-19, related to the resources that exist, be it food, nutrition, nutritional resources, job-related resources, small business-related resources. Please, I welcome you to go to our website. I also welcome you to call us with any challenges, 804-401-4110. And I'll note that one of the real impactful ways that that we serve constituents, that along with my team, I serve constituents, is focusing on constituent services. So if you are having any challenges with the federal agency, Social Security Administration, OPM, the VA, please be in touch. We've been instrumental in returning millions of dollars in taxpayer owed money back to Virginia 7 residents. And so if there's any challenges that you all may be facing with a federal agency, please know that we can assist in that way. Again, it's spanberger.house.gov. I thank you all for your questions. I thank you for your engagement in our legislative process, and I thank you so much for your time. I hope you all are staying safe, and I wish you and your families the very, very best. Thank you.
As we come to the end of this live event this evening, we definitely want to thank you for taking the time to join us for this important telephone town hall with Congresswoman Spanberger. We truly appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions. But if we were not able to get to your questions, you can call the district office, 804-401-4110 during normal business hours, or go online to spanberger.house.gov. We will host more of these events in the future to keep you informed on what Congresswoman Spanberger is working on for you in Central Virginia. Thank you again for participating. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and have a wonderful evening.